Hey there everybody, welcome to part 2 of 3 for the Layouts, Pencils, and Inks process video for Tracking Prey for Black Oath Games Frostbound Exiles. Enjoy! Alright, you can see me laying in some long lines here. The goal of all of this is to create sort of a frame on her. So she's our main subject. And so while we might have all these little details of the rocks, essentially what it's doing, if I do it right, is pushing your attention to her. And so you're wanting to build a frame that surrounds the main figure, a focal point. And so as this progresses, you'll see that these rocks will get darker. A, because they're in the foreground, but B, because I want to try and push your eye to the focal point, or her, with the dark blacks of the rock. And so ideally what you want is this spotlight, subtle spotlight, unless the figure is actually in a spotlight, but a subtle spotlight where most of the detail, most of the lightness of the drawing is where the main figure is. And so we're working up to that point, and it seems very painstaking and long. I mean, I'm having a great time doing it. Obviously, I wouldn't keep doing it this way, but there's a process and there's an end goal in mind here. And many people who look at art don't realize that. Maybe they don't appreciate it. But there is an end goal. And that end goal is to highlight the main subject. Always. And so you're constantly pushing and laying in, whether it be color or ink, to sort of push the viewer's eye in the direction of the main character. And while we're using black ink here, the lines are actually creating a grayscale on the drawing. And so you'll see me go back later and darken a lot of things in, but this base gray of the rock is kind of setting the tone for where light and shadow is on it, and starting to set that frame. And then the trees and the other figure in the drawing will complete that frame along with the rock. I want to say that most of this hatching that I'm doing is very much inspired by Alfredo Alcala, who did a lot of the inking of John Buscema back in the day on Marvel Comics Conan, magazine size and regular comic size. And I can almost assure you that he used quill on his inking. And if you look at those old Conan comics, which I'm just completely inspired and intrigued by the inking process, by a lot of the inkers there, honestly, but Alfredo Alcala seems to be the one that, for whatever reason, and everybody sees a little bit different in different artists, but he seems to be the one that I gravitate towards, and really where I try to work my inks like. If I were to say, yep, I want to be like this guy or this inker, Alfredo Alcala would be the one that I would emulate the most in my mind. Now that might not always translate, because all artists inevitably have to be themselves as well, but he just does a phenomenal job of inking, and especially on the boulders and rocks, and framing, all that. Alright, I've switched to a Tombow. Actually, I think this is a Pentel brush pen, and this is a preloaded brush with ink. And again, just adding in more ink, more contrast, defining. And then once I get going here, I'll want to get in some shadows behind each of those icicles, and that'll be with this brush pen as well. And then just generally darkening and putting black throughout this. Again, we're trying to create this frame, and subtly we're building up, building to create this frame around our subject, who has yet to appear in ink, although you'll see that if you stay tuned. So here's the icicle shadows that I'm adding in. And you can see my hand is raised up because it's inevitable I'm going to stick my hand in wet ink. The ink dries pretty quick, but if I don't keep my hand sort of poised up above, I will inevitably stick my hand in black ink and smear it, and then I will have to do something to correct it. So these I'm working on now, just more shadows, but there's also, think of this thing as three-dimensional, and so she's standing out on this three-dimensional outcropping, and if there's icicles on this side of the outcropping, then there's icicles on the other side, and so that's what I'm sort of showing with a few of those dark spots that are dangling down. That's those icicles on the far side that have formed. And then back to more shadow. When you're doing these shadows, you really need to know where your light source is coming from. And so in this case, the light source is kind of coming from the drawing's right, or my right, our right. And so you can see that I'm leaving a little bit of a white space, and then the shadow lays down. All right, here you can see the trees on the right hand side majestically appeared. No work at all on those whatsoever. No, I'm just kidding. I probably took a coffee break and forgot to restart my camera. As art is, sometimes you just get involved before you engage all of your tools, and I forgot to turn the camera on for those trees. But you'll see me working on the background trees as we work here. Here I'm working in on the footprints and in the snow, and so, you know, I've walked through the snow, and so I've observed how that looks, and so you have a deep depression, which is the dark, and then you have sort of the fluff that is both at the front of the foot track, where it sort of pushes the snow up, and in this case towards the viewer or towards the right, and then you have the trail as you lift your foot up and go to the next step. This sort of drops errant snow off your foot as it goes, and so you have a distinct trail. And that's what I'm working on right now. It's just working on the push versus the drop and how the light is hitting that, because inevitably all art is how the light is hitting at anything that we're drawing, especially in black and white. How the light, and you're constantly asking yourself, how is the light hitting? How is it hitting? How is it hitting? Where's it coming from? What's it illuminating? What stands out? And how can I show a viewer exactly what I want to show them with the light and with the dark? So in pieces like this, you really want to try and work in a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. And then in larger pieces, you might want to work in a couple other varieties there too, the forward mid and mid back and so on and so forth. So you've got, in the foreground, you've got her and you've got the rock outcropping. And then what you'd say the middle ground would be is those two trees on the right, and then some of the trees on the left, and then you've got your background, which is even further back and less defined, in that you've got your other row of pine trees and the mountaintops. And so you're just trying to build this scene from front to back. And with inking, it's especially important to build it from front to back. With painting, you want to build it from back to front. So you almost have to switch the way you do things when you go from inking to painting and vice versa. At least that's the way I learned it. And being completely self-taught, maybe that's not the absolute correct way to do it, but it seems to work for me. All right. Working on her hand with the spear. Getting that inked in and all the fingers and whatnot. Because again, I'm working from foreground to background. And so I want to work on those trees next, but I can't until I get her spear done and her hand. And wrapping those fingers around in space around that haft of the spear. It's got to be done just right. Alright, she's got this strap that holds some sort of pouch, kind of cuts across. You're going to see that that curves around the contours of her body, and work that in along with the dagger she's got. At least the hilt of the dagger anyway. Redefining her shape with these dark lines around the outside, and then some hatching to bring the gray part around, and then also defining where the material is seamed together over her chest. Just taking in every little aspect of how I want to arrange and how I want to show each piece, and then where the shadow is, where the light is. Sort of the drawback of using quill and ink is that you constantly have to go back to the ink pot. Now, they do make pens these days that Rapidograph or some name that they use. I don't quite know. I don't use them. I still like the monotony, I guess, or the meditative quality of going back to the pot and inking. Alright, continuing work on the belt here and that high-waisted chunk of leather that she's wearing. It's going to be a mostly dark down and through here as it recesses back and as the thigh and knee, lower leg all kind of hide that region, and so that'll be all recessed back and it'll be darker. I'm just working in the folds of her trousers or pants and making sure they're still following her form all the way through and following the curve and the perspective. And that's why they call it an art form, because it's kind of an art to know and to be able to place those lines in a manner in which they are going to tell the viewer exactly what you want them to know. How the leg is moving, how the pants are creasing, and how the light is hitting it all. I feel like I could go a little bit heavier with the dark black inks. I know there are styles out there that I admire that go really heavy with creating a full divide between black and white without all of the hatching. But I'm just not confident with it, I guess. And so you'll see a lot of the times I'll lay in some hatching, and then I'll lay in hatching over top of it, and I'll lay in hatching over top of it. And when I come back in with the Pentel Brush Pen, I'll just make it all black. And part of that is feeling my way through the drawing and feeling where I can push darks and lights and shadow and where I can't. And if I think that I need to separate a form, a lot of the times I'll leave it gray with the hatching, and then go back later and decide that it can go all the way, push it all the way black. And I know I can't remember who I heard this from, but very, very popular artist basically said there is no gray, you just need to go black. Well, I like the gray, and I don't know, I just can't go black all the way with the ink right away. It just it feels foreign to me. It feels like I've got to build the shape first, and maybe it's because I haven't learned that technique yet, but I'll continue hatching and laying in grays, and then eventually covering them all up with black. Alright, working on the pullover of a boot. Talked about this during the penciling phase, but now I'm working on line weight, especially where the boot is pulled over the other part of the boot, that cuff, and making sure that there are thicker lines where the light would cast a shadow from the cuff onto the actual boot. And then also defining the shape of that cuff with hatching. And here you can see I'm going to go right back in and do exactly what I said I was hesitant to do, which was laying a lot of black. But that spot where her pouch, basically it's like a satchel, hangs behind her, it just needed to be black. And it took me a minute to get there, but we got there. And then, of course, now trying to bring her pants and her figure in around, and keeping in mind we're still trying to frame, in this case we want her face and chest area and that hand that's pointing, we want that to be the object of our viewers' attention. and not anything else. And so we're still trying to frame. You can see now I'm going right to black after hatching. So I do a lot of work and then I cover it all up with black. Such is life.